We're very excited to have you today, and thanks so much for joining our special event. We're excited to bring you some good content today. For those that don't know me, I'm Mike Allshouse. I'm an account manager here with Byteworks. I'm going to be hosting our session today. For those that may not know a ton about Byteworks, I wanted to just make sure that folks know who we are, what we do very briefly. We're an IT services and solutions group. We've got a team of engineers that's focused in 4 different specialty areas. Cybersecurity, which is going to be a heavy topic for us today. Enterprise networking, a data center, and collaboration are the areas that we work the heaviest in the IT realm. We are, of course, a close partner with Cisco, which is why we're excited to bring you a session today along with the Cisco team. So today, we're going to be talking on the all-important security topic. And I've got 2 subject matter experts with me here today. I've got Chantel from the Cisco team, and I've got Wes from the Byteworks group, who's going to be walking us through some very tactical situations and tactical questions. We, as Cisco and Byteworks, know there's a lot of content out there on this topic today. There are a lot of questions around it. There's a lot of discussion currently underway, but we wanted to put our own spin on this topic by getting very tactical. And of course, it's not a fun thing to think about, but the more prepared you are and the more training you've gone through prior to a situation, we think the better off you're going to be in the actual moment. So really, there's 2 sides to what we want to have as a discussion today. There's a proactive side, which I'm going to cover off with Wes on first. And then we're going to get into really the moment of and beyond from there. So the moment of and forward with Chantel, we're going to get more specific there. I'm going to pull up a little deck for us to reference, and then I'm going to jump into a couple things with Wes here. So Wes, I know there's a lot of conversation, a lot of content on this very, very important topic right now, but I think where we need to start with our audience is talking about the best ways to be proactive. So what really needs to happen before you find yourself in a situation? And what we know, of course, is that there's nothing that you can do that will 100% prevent this from happening to you. But all of these things that you're going to walk us through are meant to help minimize risk. So can you walk us through, at a high level, what are those basics that everybody should have in place to be proactive today?
Absolutely. Yeah, so all companies should have following technologies and processes in place to significantly reduce the chance of an incident and the possible exposure or loss should an incident occur. The first of those is good password policies and effective password management. Next, and these are 2 closely tied together, is MFA, or multi-factor authentication for all users. These 2 items together help positively identify authorized users, and they're critical to securing your data, and particularly your email, where many threats come in. Next is a vulnerability management program with regular scanning and patching, at least an annual pen test by a third party. These 2 items together help identify and remediate risk in your network. So it'll find places that a hacker would go after that would make his life easier. You don't want those to exist. Next, very important, is a security awareness training program, preferably one that includes phishing simulations. Again, you're trying to protect against that easy entry through email that so many threats come in with. Next would be a quality endpoint protection product, next-gen antivirus or next-gen anti-malware on every endpoint, preferably as a managed service, as an MDR, so you've got a 24/7 SOC behind it. You definitely need the good product. If you can afford it, having the 24/7 SOC watching it for you is a big plus and protects you in the evening hours and the off hours with somebody that will take an action quickly on your behalf. Next, quality firewalls. Almost everybody's got a firewall. This is old school, but you've got to have a decent firewall. It's got to be correctly configured, and that configuration has to be regularly reviewed. They're not static things. Things change in your network. You need to make sure that the firewall keeps up with changes in your network. Another important piece of this that we see being neglected is VPN policies on the firewall. You've got to review the VPN policies and keep them up to date with the rest of your security configuration. So email security is vital. talked about a little bit with the MFA. At minimum, you need, if you're using O365, it needs to be configured correctly with MFA. You want to have optimized DNS settings for SPIF, DCOM, and DMARC records to reduce email forgery attempts. That is by many people. Those are DNS settings you set with your DNS provider or registrar, and they need to be tuned and adjusted to prevent forgery on your email accounts. Another key thing, and we heard this from the FBI when we've had some meetings with them, is you need to identify and build an instant response group that will be called together in any serious event. This group needs to include representatives from IT, management, HR, legal, and if you have them, public relations where they exist. It is not acceptable to form this team during an event. It must have been identified beforehand, and all parties need to understand their roles. Optimally, this team will run through a simulated event scenario or tabletop exercise at least annually. Lastly, a detailed HR disaster recovery plan is highly recommended. And if you create one, you should practice it with a dry run, a tabletop, at least annually. A real failover test annually is even better. So those are the top things.
Yeah, that's good, Wes. It's easy for us to run through a high-level list like this in just a couple of minutes. What you and I know from a lot of our work with customers is that some of these tools are not easy to afford in all cases. Some of these can be expensive. Oftentimes, our customers want experts that know these tools extremely well to manage them. So they may be under-resourced to not only evaluate what the best options are, but then also to manage the tool on an ongoing basis. So it's not a perfect world out there. It's not as easy as going out and just buying everything on this list right down in this order. So for those organizations that don't have all this today, that do have constraints in some of those areas, resources, dollars to spend, all of that, where do you suggest they start? If there are constraints, what are the most critical ones on this list to get after first?
The fastest increasing threat, especially as far as dollar value to companies a few years ago, was ransomware. Ransomware is still up there, but business email compromise is the latest, biggest thing. And this can be redirecting routing on payments, intercepting information between customer and client. So the best way to deal with that, again, put that MFA on your email, make sure it's used, make sure passwords are rotated regularly and have complex passwords and they expire. Maintain your accounts. If somebody leaves, disable that account. Protect that email. A top-notch endpoint protection tool, again, is important in case something does get through as a virus or malware. It can be stopped on the computer before it spreads. And back to what I said before, tune those DMARC records, SPIF records, DCOM, DNS records. They're rarely configured correctly. Sometimes they're not configured at all. They help enormously to reduce spoofing and email compromise. Those are very important.
That's great. And in your experience, Wes, on working with customers, what is the most overlooked on this list? What do you often find that is not in somebody's environment that really needs to be as a fundamental?
DNS records are important, but having those right would have saved some events that we saw over the past few years. But the other big one is back to the firewall configurations, and not so much the firewall itself's configuration, but the VPN configuration. We have seen multiple successful intrusions through old VPN configurations where a customer has replaced, gotten a better solution or a different solution for a VPN, but never really took down the old configuration, and people have gotten in through it. It may be on an older, weaker firewall that's got known vulnerabilities published with hacks out there, but make sure that you always go through those VPN configurations. You've got one primary VPN, keep that one up to date and get rid of any old ones. If you go through an acquisition and they had a firewall, there may be a VPN configuration on there that you're not even aware of that may be old and vulnerable. So very important to watch those. A pen test will usually identify those. Sometimes a good vulnerability scan will identify them too.
Great. Well, this is a really good start, Wes. I appreciate you sharing this. Again, for our audience, I know it's easy for us to talk this through, especially because we're living this day in, day out. If there are pieces of this list that you don't have in place or are uncomfortable with, or don't even know where to start, remember that partners like us out there can help answer questions on this and at least get you started and push you in the right direction. So thanks, Wes. That's what I wanted to cover from a proactive standpoint during our discussion today. I want to transition this over to Chantel. I'm going to bump ahead in our slide here and really start to get into what are the things that need to happen when a breach has been discovered. So we're coming in the morning as a technical person in our organization. We discover that something's wrong. We notice that something obscure, something from the outside of our network is suddenly in, and we're starting to think that there could be a problem here. So Chantel, that's the mindset that I want to put us and our audience members in. I know this is a really big topic. I'm going to let you run with this in large part because I know you have a lot of experience with it, and Cisco, deals with these situations head on. Where I'd like to start though is what is the first thing that technical lead person should do when something like this is discovered when they're coming in first thing in the morning?
Well, so first thing in the morning, most likely the person that discovers an anomaly isn't going to be the incident manager or the person that has been identified to bring everybody together to handle the problem, that kind of thing. So frankly, just identifying it in the first place a lot of times can be the hardest part. But the first thing you do is go to that phone list. So all of those things, those people that you identified when you were putting your preparation and plans together, just call whoever you see there because you're going to be freaked out. You're not going to know what to do. That person has a list, a checklist, a playbook. And ideally, you already put a run book together for these first line responders to start taking some action. If nothing else, once you've made that call, of course, this threat could be a number of different things. You could be referencing any of those tool sets, any of those logs, any of those different types of anomalies. I mean, it could be someone trying to break in the front door, following you in, right? But the first thing that you're really going to want to do after the fact, because you want to be busy, you need to keep going, right? Document everything you do, everybody you called, what time you saw everything that you saw and what it was, and isolate whatever you know to be related to this threat as much as possible. So it's really important to try to get a snapshot of the growth from the beginning. And ideally, if you're able, collect as much data as possible, whether that's indicators of the compromise that drew you to make this decision or to make this call. And then also, anything that's involved, any endpoints, host names, that might even be the system owners. So what department, what kind of data were they accessing? Of course, these threats could be a lot of different things. So collect as much as you can that might be evidence, whether you know it to be or not. Or maybe it just seems like it could be related. Document that. Isolate it. Take a snapshot as much as you can, either a literal snapshot or just as much as you can document, maybe in your ticketing system or some kind of sharing point of contact.
Yeah, the documentation is a big piece that I just heard you say, and I think that's really good because I don't think that's the first thing that people are thinking about when they're walking into a situation like this.
Yeah, because you're not thinking about what you're going to do after the fact or how you're going to handle it or eradicate. You're just, what do I do right now? I need to stop it, right?
And there's a lot of things that I would think would come into your mind about what to do right now. Is it hit that off switch on the network and start pulling plugs? Is it spread the message to a mass audience within the organization to make everybody aware right away? I know certain situations are going to dictate certain actions, but should our audience should they be giving into those gut reactions and doing those things right away? Or is it more of, let's be methodical about this and take some slow steps first?
So it depends on what those slow steps are because this can progress really, really fast, right? And it's really normal to think, oh, just pull the plug, end it, right? And that is absolutely viable. It will isolate that endpoint, but it also can destroy evidence. So finding root cause later can be a lot harder, especially for incident responders coming in from outside the organization if you have that in place. So ideally, you'll have tools in place that are able to isolate either specific devices or areas of the network that can cut it off. But it'll still be available for analysis, but no longer able to access other areas of your network. But like I said, it's not that it won't be successful. If you don't know what else to do, okay, pull the plug, you know? If you don't have another solution, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. Ideally, though, isolation is the way to go. As far as what you said about notifying everybody everywhere, no. Well, panic is what you're doing, but let's try to keep everyone else in a state where you can control it, right? So at this point, things have expanded a little more. You're beyond just the incident commander or the incident manager. Now you're going to need to let other people know, whether that's your own internal resources, CIO, like I mentioned, the department or system owner who had hands on that device or who may have been the one that was personally attacked in a phishing message. This could also be human resources. So again, this could be various types of attacks. Maybe someone's being harassed or there's been some kind of exploitation in play. It could be public affairs. Wes mentioned this also. If you have a communications rules in place and a group that handles that, definitely bring them in. They're going to have a plan in place for how to notify who and when, both internally and externally. Legal, get in touch with legal. There's a lot of different reasons for this. It stinks that we have to think about this all the time, but a lot of times there can be legal ramifications for the way that people respond in the moment, or it could be for the company as a whole to outsiders, right? So if you've accidentally or incidentally through this process released information to these attackers, so personal information, payment card information, and the like, obviously people are going to need to be notified in a very controlled manner.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of times law enforcement can come into play, US CERT specifically. In fact, if you're a federal agency, this is required that you notify them. A lot of this is going to be dictated through your cyber insurance provider, anything that you've planned up front, or if you do have incident response services in place. And you've done tabletop exercises by now, right? Or hopefully you have. And if not, there are organizations that can help you through the process.
Yep, and I'm looking at your steps here that I really like on the screen, and we've talked a good amount about preparation already, which is a huge, huge piece of this. Before we get into a communication plan and who we're going to talk to, I think the first thing that this person that discovers this is going to do is find out the scope. They're going to uncover how widespread this is, how many different systems are impacted, and if it's been stopped yet, or if this is continuing to spread and move. So those are the first two things I'm thinking of right away, which is really your detection phase. You need to detect what it is, how far its reach has already gotten, and is it continuing to move? Is it still, on the move? So I'm just thinking in very specific instances right now, before we even get to communicating and thinking about insurance and thinking about FBI, all of that, we need to immediately focus on stopping what it is and understanding how far it's actually gotten in the network, right?
Yeah, and actually the image here from NIST is really good for this conversation because this is a cyclic process, right? You're continually going to be doing that additional research, going through your logs, evaluating alerts in your SIM. A lot of times there can be some confusion between the differences of what's an event, what's an alert, and what's an incident, right? And these are very different things, but a lot of times you can detect things like lateral movement from looking at some of these event logs, login processes, unusual users, or escalated privileges. And ideally, you'll have built out alerts for these things over time as you determine what's normal, what's baseline, and what's anomalous, right? Who should have what access. And of course, there are a number of tools that can assist you with this. And it's gotten to the point where networks are so complex that you need those tools in place, if not a service provider that can manage them for you. And that would be ideal, but to be looking for these types of behaviors, determining what that baseline is, and then doing further detection, further analysis. And so that's that circle of life, right? So I mentioned earlier, isolating an endpoint or isolating an area of your network. Well, that's part of the containment process. And ideally, you'll be doing some eradication. That's going to be coming a little further along in the process. It's not the immediate concern. Containment really is right now just getting it under control and understanding how far that spread is. This might come to you through those firewall logs that we mentioned before, sharing of emails internally, even spamming externally. You may have become the attacker in this situation. So all of those things are going to be a part of that process. So containment, detect further information, analyze that information, write down everything you find or document it somewhere, and then continue to do that again. Contain and recover is going to be a part of sort of the next steps. But then you just continue that process. You're going to be following it methodically. Every time you see a firewall interaction or a internal movement, SMB connection, that kind of thing that seems to be related to the event, follow it to that next location. Look for alerts in adjacent systems or similar access from this unknown user on other machines, right? Be evaluating your entire footprint, which is a lot of information, but that's what we have these systems for, to try to correlate data and pull it together and create responsive actions that you can take.
So after we've detected and we've done our best to contain and we've understood the scope of the incident that's happening, that's when our communication plan kicks in. And I'm hearing you say, you have your communication plan already laid out in your incident response and your tabletop exercise that you've already prepared with. So there's going to be some internal contacts that you notify first. Ultimately, then amongst you as a team, there's going to be a plan that's laid out for external communication, which is going to include your cybersecurity insurance, which is more than likely going to be handled by a legal team. And then there's ultimately going to be some PR, and there's going to be external communication that happens to somebody to report to. So there's going to be, in a lot of cases, a government agency to ultimately report to. Right, Chantel?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's something I think that's worth mentioning is the cyber insurance provider. And a lot of you may actually be thinking that isn't the first stop for me, right? Is insurance what I need to worry about when I'm in this situation? Well, a lot of times it is, because in a lot of cases they dictate who you can reach out to externally for assistance, right? So do you have someone on retainer for incident response? Do you have a team that you're supposed to contact to assist you in making those next steps actually occur? And if not, there certainly are incident response teams. Talos, for example, has a website. I've posted a link actually in your next slide here, where, okay, I never did take any of these steps. We haven't gotten that far. We haven't made any of those decisions. What do I do? They have a phone number right at the top that says, hey, if I'm experiencing an incident right now and I've got nowhere to go, call them, right? And that can give you some assistance there. Yeah, so there is a series of internal contacts and external contacts in a way that this occurs. And when we say that we're the first person to interact, a lot of times that's going to be help desk, or that's going to be some user that just sees a funny message on their machine that's indicative of maybe that ransomware attack, taking those next steps or making additional calls. It could be a part of the network team that doesn't have anything to do with security. Unfortunately, sometimes there's some silos still. That's where that list of contacts internally is absolutely necessary. If you do nothing else, do that, right? Know who your incident commander is going to be, who's on call 24/7 to respond to an incident that you may have just discovered in the middle of the night. And they will have those next steps to take, whether that be, okay, well, let me reach out to cyber insurance, let me reach out to US CERT or law enforcement agencies, the FBI. This is all going to be determined based on your vertical and your regulatory requirements, compliance requirements and the like. Those are going to vary a lot. So try to have those contacts known to you already in this list. But like I said, if you don't, there are emergency resources out there that you can get in touch with. US CERT now also connect you with some of those. If you got a partner like Byteworks, they can help you who to call, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And can you summarize just quickly? I know you already alluded to this resources slide, Chantel, but just walk the audience through what they should be paying attention to here.
Yeah, so I didn't want to make this an overwhelming list, so I just put a couple of quick hit resources here. Of course, I'm going to mention Talos. That's where we get and this is actually our internal organization. This is where we get our intelligence research. This is where we generate all of those IOCs that you're seeing in those endpoint products from Cisco. They're also evaluating malware, constantly, but they definitely get involved in both pre-work and post-work, which can be assisting you with that preparation, assisting you in determining what gaps you have in your technology, and then also having a retainer on hand where you can reach out and immediately get assistance. There's not going to be a wait if there's a bunch of breaches going on at the same time.
Yep.
So I gave you just a quick hit list, a link to them. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, if you haven't heard of them, you will soon, or you have probably heard about their teachings regardless. And that's where we get a lot of our regulations and what to do next and how to move forward. They provide frameworks, they provide information, quick guides for small business, medium business, large enterprise, and the like. And then I referenced SANS. They've got a lot of training materials that are absolutely free. They do have paid courses. And I wasn't paid to say that, by the way. I'm just referencing them because they do provide you with a lot of free resources as well. Things like security policy templates that you can use for building these response activities and getting an idea of what should I have in my list, right? And a lot of those are templated for you to just mix and match for your users.
Great. Well, I appreciate you walking us through these resources. And that's one of the things we want to arm our audience with is places to go, folks to talk to. When you're in the middle of a situation like this, you're obviously not going to be alone. I bet you there is a feeling of aloneness during this process, but it's through the preparation and then it's through having available resources to get in touch with quickly that's really going to help guide during the process. So thanks, Chantel. We're out of time here. Really, the way I look at this is a first step.
Yeah.
We, as Cisco and Byteworks, we want to help prepare as many folks for situations like this as possible. And this is the first step in the conversation. Come to us if you want to have more detailed conversations about your environment, about where you are in your journey, and what still needs to happen for you to feel like you are as prepared as you can be to take on the situation. So thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today. This is going to conclude our time. Again, we hope this is the start of the conversation. Let's keep it going in an effort to defend as much as we can against these threats. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Chantel. Thank you, Wes.
Thanks, guys.
All right, bye.